To many people, that will be a stunning thought that these psychiatric medications, by and large, are not beneficial over the long term. And there's another point that your book made, and there was a development on this that you discussed in an interview recently, which is in the book you talked about the chemical imbalance theory of mental illness, and the notion that while that makes it easier in the economic way to sell psychiatric drugs, there's very little to support this. It might even be described as a kind of pseudoscience, and that seemed like a shocking idea just a few short years ago in 2010. But now we have Ronald Pies, who's the editor-in-chief emeritus of Psychiatric Times, saying just a year later, and I quote, "In truth, the chemical imbalance notion was always a kind of urban legend, never a theory seriously propounded by well-informed psychiatrists." And yet I think if you talk to most psychiatrists in this country, they're still basing a lot of their practice on that theory. Isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you speak to a group of people who've been diagnosed and you ask how many of them have been told they have chemical imbalances in the brain, virtually every hand in the room will go up. Listen, this is, I think, at the heart of the problem. So we were told, beginning in the 1980s, that these drugs fix chemical imbalances in the brain, like insulin for diabetes. And, that is a story of great progress, because that is telling us that the pathology of these disorders became known, and now we had an antidote to that pathology. But when you dig into the science, you find that, A, it was always just a hypothesis. B, it was a hypothesis born of an understanding of how drugs acted on the brain, psychiatric drugs, and researchers then speculating, in essence, that maybe the problem was the opposite of what the drugs did. So, for example, an antidepressant increases serotonin. They hypothesized that people had low serotonin. But when they actually searched, for example, did research to see if people who were depressed had low serotonergic activity, and this goes back to the 80s, they didn't find it to be so, at least not prior to going on the medications. And so you really see at the heart of this is this extraordinary delusion, or a really sort of a white lie that was peddled to the American public.